He enlisted in York, Pennsylvania, which is only 30 miles from Gettysburg. And so we're all descendants, and we had commemorative events. We're often mistakenly identified as reenactors. We don't reenact. The reenactors are people who are living historians that do battle scenes and so forth. We don't do battle scenes. People that do the battle scenes, the Confederate side and the Union side, you know, they're still fighting the war. Sons of Union veterans of the Civil War, we know the war is over, and we won it. Confederates disagree. They have an organization, the Sons of Confederate Veterans, which they still haven't quite accepted. That's what makes the Civil War so interesting, is that it's still contentious today. It's mentioned all the time. So.
All right, hey, let's give a round of applause for our color sergeant.
Yay. Are any of you folks descended from Civil War veterans of either side? You, ma'am. You know anything about your ancestor?
My great-grandfather.
Huh? And which side was he on?
The other side.
The other side. And what state?
Missouri.
Missouri. Well, Missouri's another one of those
border state. Border state.
That had regiments on both sides. Missouri, which was a slave state that stayed in the Union, but there's still a star on the Confederate flag for Missouri. Because I think that was the case where the governor was Confederate leaning and the legislature was not. So they never voted to secede, but the governor sent representatives to the Confederate Congress, and they were admitted to the Confederacy as a Confederate state despite not having seceded. And the same thing happened in Kentucky. And Maryland almost seceded, except for the intervention of federal forces, which is very important, because if Maryland has seceded, that surrounded the capital of the United States. So basically that would have been the end of it. I mean, you know, the Confederacy would have basically taken control of the United States Capitol, and they'd have had to move to Ohio or someplace. So I was just talking with this gentleman here, and the hated by the Confederacy General Ben Butler, who was one of the first generals appointed because he'd been a militia general in Massachusetts. He occupied Federal Hill in Baltimore, which controlled the city of Baltimore. So because of our artillery and so forth, and that kept Maryland in the United States. And so that was one of the lesser known incidents that really influenced the war, and of course there are a lot of those.
Thank God for Bates Butler and the chamber pot incident.
How many have heard of that? Benjamin Butler in New Orleans. Well, that's something that just enraged the Confederacy. What happened was that in '62, when the Union took over New Orleans as part of the effort to split the Confederacy by seizing control of the Mississippi River, the patriotic ladies of New Orleans were resentful of the Union occupation, and they would harass some of the Union soldiers and sailors in uniform. And the story goes that some lady had dumped a chamber pot on the Admiral Farragut.
Oh no!
And General Butler, the same General Butler who was in Baltimore, who was in charge of the Union troops in New Orleans, put out what is called the Woman Order, decreeing that any lady who performed these kinds of disruptive acts would be treated as a woman of the town. Which, oh, you know what that means. Yes, it meant that they would be treated like prostitutes. This enraged the entire South. It went viral. The British Parliament met to denounce this affront to womanhood and so forth and so on. But there were no more incidents. So it had its effect. And another thing Butler's not given credit for is that he cleaned up a lot of the sloughs and swamps and cesspools, and there was no yellow fever in New Orleans that year because he cleaned up the town in more ways than one.
What was your name, sir?
Dave Schleter.
Dave Slater. Let's give a hand for Dave Slater.
Yay!
Huzzah! Huzzah! Huzzah!
My great grandfather.
All right.